Chapter 6: The Message. Dr. Aris Thorne stood in Europa Station's communications center, staring at the quantum transmitter that would carry her words across the void to Earth. In less than an hour, Admiral Cato's fleet would arrive with orders to sterilize Europa's ocean. "The connection is established," Dr. Chen announced, her transformed features reflecting the blue glow of the transmission array. Full-spectrum broadcast to Earth's primary communication networks. "You'll have approximately 18 minutes before they can cut the feeds. 18 minutes to convince 16 billion people that their species' salvation lay in becoming something that would terrify them beyond comprehension. 18 minutes to prevent a war between what humanity was and what it was becoming." Aris activated the transmitter. Across 400 million kilometers, her image appeared on screens throughout the solar system. "My name is Dr. Aris Thorne," she began, her voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "I'm speaking to you from Europa Station, where I have witnessed something that will fundamentally change how we understand ourselves, our history, and our future." She paused, knowing that in command centers across Earth, military officials were already working to cut her transmission. She had to make every word count. 123 years ago, we celebrated the greatest medical triumph in human history. The Kronos vaccine eliminated cancer, extended our lifespans, and created the golden age we now inhabit. But Kronos did something else, something its creators either didn't understand or chose not to reveal. The transmission array flickered as jamming signals tried to interfere, but Europa Station's quantum systems held firm. "We are not just evolved apes, as we have always believed. We are metamorphically arrested sea creatures. Every human being alive today carries within their genes the complete developmental program to become something magnificent and alien, beyond our current understanding." On her personal display, Aris could see the transmission being picked up and rebroadcast by independent networks faster than the authorities could suppress them. The message was spreading. "In the depths of Europa's ocean, I have encountered the collectives, beings who were once human individuals like ourselves, now transformed into unified consciousnesses that transcend every limitation of individual thought. They are not monsters. They are not conquerors. They are us, completing a biological journey that was interrupted millions of years ago." Through the station sensors, she could feel the presence of the collectives in the depths below, their bioluminescent communications pulsing with encouragement and sorrow in equal measure. "A military fleet approaches Europa with orders to destroy these beings, convinced they represent a threat to human civilization. But the only threat they pose is to our illusions about what we are and what we might become. The choice before us is not between humanity and extinction, it is between remaining incomplete and achieving our biological destiny." The transmission array sparked as more aggressive jamming attempts began. She had perhaps 2 minutes left. "I know this is frightening. I know it challenges everything we believe about ourselves. But I have experienced their consciousness, felt the harmony of minds united in purpose while retaining their individual worth. They remember being human. They remember the loneliness, the fear, the desperate isolation of separate minds. And they remember the transcendent joy of connection." Alarms began sounding throughout the station. The fleet had arrived ahead of schedule. To Admiral Cato and the military forces approaching Europa, these beings are not your enemy. They are your children, your future, the fulfillment of every parent's dream that their offspring might become something greater than themselves. To destroy them is to commit genocide against our own evolution. Dr. Rashid appeared at her side, his ancient eyes reflecting decades of regret and desperate hope. The lead ships are powering weapons, he said quietly. And to my colleagues on Earth who will call this message the ranting of someone compromised by alien influence, you are not wrong. I have been changed by what I've seen here. But I have been changed in the way that anyone is changed by witnessing beauty beyond their previous comprehension. The transmission cut out as Europa station systems were overwhelmed by military-grade electronic warfare. But Aris knew her words had reached their intended audience. Across human space, the message would be analyzed, debated, spread through unofficial channels. Seeds of understanding had been planted. Now came the harder part. Admiral Kato materialized in Europa Station's docking bay through emergency transport, her face grim with the weight of unpleasant duty. Behind her came a squad of Marines in full combat armor, weapons designed specifically for the neutralization of biological targets. Dr. Thorne, the Admiral said without preamble. By order of the United Earth Defense Council, you are under arrest for treason, conspiracy, and violation of biological containment protocols. The entities in Europa's ocean represent a Class A existential threat to human civilization and will be neutralized. Aris stood calmly in the bay center, flanked by Dr. Rashid and the station's transformed crew. She felt strangely peaceful, as if her brief connection to collective consciousness had left her with a deeper understanding of inevitability. Admiral, before you proceed, I ask you to look at what you're preparing to destroy. The bay's walls became transparent, revealing Europa's ocean depths. The collectives had risen from the abyssal plains where they normally resided, their vast forms now visible as constellations of bioluminescence in the dark water. Tree entities, each larger than a spaceship, moved with graceful intelligence through their alien sea. They know you're here, Aris continued. They know what you intend. And they're not preparing to defend themselves. They're preparing to communicate. As if responding to her words, the nearest collective began emitting complex patterns of light. The station's translation systems activated automatically, converting the bioelectric signals into words that appeared on every display surface in the bay. Greetings/sadness/understanding to those WHO or US. We sense fear/anger/duty in your approach. We offer perspective/memory/truth before ending comes. Admiral Kato's expression remained impassive, but several of her Marines shifted uncomfortably as the alien communication continued. We remember military service. Remember duty/honor/sacrifice. WEWHO or Marcus served as admiral in the Martian conflict. WEWHO or Elena died at Titan Station defending human colonies from asteroids. Our component selves gave their individual lives for the protection of our species. Psychological warfare, the Admiral said tersely, though her voice carried less certainty than before. Not warfare/not manipulation. Truth/memory/offering. We extend invitation to understanding. Brief connection without permanent joining. Experience what we are before judgment final. Admiral, Aris said urgently, they're offering you what they offered me. Temporary interface with their consciousness. You can experience their reality directly, understand what they truly are, and make your decision based on knowledge rather than fear. Absolutely not. I won't allow my judgment to be compromised by alien influence. But we are not alien, came the collective's patient response. We are human transformed. We are your future seeking understanding from your present. Dr. Rashid stepped forward, his ancient voice carrying the weight of prophecy. Admiral, I created the system that produced these beings. I've spent over a century trying to understand what I unleashed upon humanity. They are not our enemies. They are our children, grown beyond our recognition but retaining our essential nature. Children don't pose existential threats to their parent species. Don't they? Aris challenged. Every generation surpasses the one before. Every child eventually grows beyond their parents' ability to understand or control them. The collectives are simply the next step in that eternal process. Through the transparent walls, they could see more collectives rising from the depths. The entire ecosystem of Europa's transformed humans was presenting itself for judgment, dozens of individuals who had chosen transcendence over individual mortality, now unified into beings that dwarfed any single consciousness. Decision point approaches, the collectives communicated. Weapons offending, prepare to fire. We choose not to defend, preserve, continue if defense means harm to those WHO or US. Prefer dissolution to violence against former selves. Admiral Chen's composure cracked slightly. You won't fight back? Violence against origin species would corrupt what we have become. Better to end than to betray core values of human heritage. They're choosing martyrdom, Aris realized. They won't defend themselves if it means harming baseline humans. The Admiral was quiet for a long moment, studying the massive beings that waited patiently for her decision. When she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its military certainty. If I allow the interface, if I experience their consciousness directly, will I still be able to make an objective decision? Objectivity unchanged, the collectives assured her. Perspective expanded. Fear reduced through understanding. Choice remains individual always. Admiral, one of her Marines spoke up, military protocol forbids. Military protocol, Kato interrupted, requires me to make informed decisions about threats to human security. If these entities are truly human-derived, I need to understand that before ordering their destruction. She looked at Aris, then at the waiting collectives, then at her own troops who would carry out whatever order she gave. Prepare the interface. Admiral Kato's experience of collective consciousness lasted only minutes, but when she emerged from the neural interface, her entire worldview had been transformed. She floated in the chamber's perfluorocarbon medium, tears mixing with the oxygenated fluid as she processed what she had experienced. They showed me Earth, she whispered as medical technicians helped her from the tank. Not as it is, but as it could be. 16 billion minds working in harmony, sharing knowledge and experience across generations. No more war because everyone truly understands everyone else's perspective. No more loneliness because individual consciousness can touch and merge at will. Aris helped her to a recovery chair, recognizing the profound disorientation that came from returning to single perspective awareness. But it requires the end of humanity as we've known it for millennia. Individual identity becomes optional. Personal privacy becomes impossible. The things that make us uniquely human, our stubborn independence, our ability to disagree and compete and grow through conflict, all of that gets subsumed into collective harmony. Is that necessarily a loss? Dr. Rashid asked gently. Chen was quiet for several minutes, processing the experience. Through the observation windows, they could see her fleet maintaining position, weapons systems powered but not yet firing. The collectives waited patiently in the depths, their bioluminescent communications creating patterns of impossible beauty in the dark water. I saw myself, Kato said finally. My own memories, but enhanced and shared among thousands of other perspectives. My childhood on Luna, my first command, the battle where I lost half my crew to orbital bombardment. But in the collective, those experiences weren't just mine anymore. They became part of a vast library of human experience that no individual could ever lose or forget. How do you feel about that? Terrified, she admitted. And tempted. The loneliness of command, the weight of making decisions that affect thousands of lives, the constant doubt about whether I'm acting wisely, all of that could be shared, lightened, guided by the wisdom of collective experience. She stood, her movements still unsteady from the interface experience. But the choice has to be freely made by every individual. Forced transformation creates incomplete collectives, beings that join but never truly harmonize. The collectives understand this. They're not trying to convert humanity by force. They're simply waiting, growing, becoming what we might choose to become if we overcome our fear. What about your orders, Admiral? Kato looked at her reflection in the darkened viewport, seeing herself as she was and as she might become. My orders were to neutralize an existential threat to human civilization. But these beings aren't threatening civilization, they're offering it the chance to transcend its current limitations. She activated her fleet communication system. All ships, this is Admiral Kato. Stand down from attack positions. The entities in Europa's ocean are not hostile. Repeat, stand down from attack positions and prepare for extended observation protocols. The response from her fleet was immediate confusion and protest. Several ship commanders demanded confirmation of the order, questioning whether the admiral had been compromised by alien influence. I have been changed by what I've experienced here, Kato acknowledged. But not compromised. I've been given perspective that our species desperately needs. The beings in this ocean are what humanity becomes when it chooses connection over isolation, shared consciousness over individual struggle. Admiral, came the voice of her second-in-command. Earth Command is monitoring this transmission. They're demanding immediate compliance with original orders. Through the station's quantum communication array, angry voices from Earth began flooding the channel. Military leaders, political officials, and scientific authorities all demanding that the alien threat be eliminated before it could spread to other human colonies. But other voices joined the cacophony. Scientists requesting more data. Philosophers questioning whether humanity had the right to destroy its own evolutionary descendants. Religious leaders debating whether the transformation represented spiritual transcendence or damnation. The debate raged across human space, but on Europa, a different conversation was taking place. Decision individual requires support from collective, the entities communicated directly to Admiral Chin. We offer temporary permanent interface to any WHO choose. No pressure / no coercion. Choice remains sacred always. Kato looked at Aris, at Dr. Rashid, at her own Marines who had witnessed the communication. They're not demanding conversion. They're not threatening consequences if we refuse. They're simply offering. The most dangerous offer in human history, one of her Marines said quietly. The chance to become gods, with the price being everything that makes us human. Or the most generous, Aris countered. The chance to transcend human limitations while retaining human values and memories. As if responding to their debate, the collectives began a new form of communication. Instead of words, they shared pure emotion, the joy of connection, the peace of understanding, the transcendent beauty of consciousness unbound by individual limitations. But alongside that beauty came profound sadness for the loneliness they remembered, the isolation they had escaped, the incomplete nature of individual existence. Admiral Kato felt the communication as a physical sensation, warm and welcoming and infinitely patient. They weren't trying to convince her. They were simply showing her what was possible. Stand down all weapons, she ordered her fleet. Establish research protocols. And prepare communication arrays for full broadcast to Earth. Admiral? Humanity needs to know what we've found here. Not as a threat to be eliminated, but as a choice to be considered. The transformation is inevitable. Everyone alive today carries the genetic potential for metamorphosis. The only question is whether we approach that future with wisdom or with fear. 6 months later, Dr. Aris Thorne stood in the Lagos Convention Center, addressing the largest gathering in human history. Representatives from every colony, every nation, every major demographic group had come together to decide humanity's response to the discovery at Europa. The debate had raged for months, fracturing governments and families alike. The question before us, Aris said, her words carried live to every inhabited world in the solar system, is not whether the transformation will occur. Our genetic analysis has confirmed that every person who has received Chronos treatment will eventually begin metamorphosis. The question is how we prepare for that future. In the months since Admiral Cato's fleet had stood down, research teams from across human space had visited Europa. Some had chosen temporary interface with the collectives. Others had remained firmly baseline, studying the transformed beings from a distance. A very few, had chosen permanent integration, adding their individual consciousness to the growing collective entities. The public reaction had been everything Aris had feared and more. Religious movements declared the collectives to be either divine transcendence or demonic possession. Political factions demanded immediate military action, while others called for voluntary mass transformation. Scientists published competing theories about the implications for human consciousness, identity, and survival as a species. But beneath the chaos of public debate, a quieter transformation was occurring. Families with super-elderly members began recognizing the early signs of metamorphosis. Individuals approaching their 130th birthdays found themselves drawn to water, to collective activities, to forms of communication that bypassed individual language. The change was slow, subtle, and utterly irreversible. We have established 3 primary response protocols, Aris continued. First, voluntary acceleration facilities for those who choose immediate transformation. Second, support systems for those experiencing natural metamorphosis. And third, research programs to understand and potentially modify the transformation process. The response from the assembly was predictable: protests from traditionalists who saw any accommodation as surrender, demands from progressives for universal voluntary transformation, and countless questions about practical implications. Admiral Cato, now serving as Director of Transhuman Affairs, took the podium. Her experience with collective consciousness had left her changed in subtle ways, more empathetic, more patient, more aware of the interconnections between seemingly separate events. The military assessment, she announced, is that the collectives pose no direct threat to baseline human civilization. They have demonstrated consistent non-aggression, even when threatened with destruction. However, their mere existence represents a form of evolutionary pressure that will increasingly affect human society. She gestured to displays showing demographic projections, genetic analysis, and sociological modeling. Within 50 years, approximately 12% of the human population will show visible signs of transformation. Within 100 years, that percentage will reach 40%. The choice before us is not whether to accept this reality, but how to adapt to it. From the assembly floor, questions and challenges flew like projectiles. How do we maintain human civilization when nearly half the population belongs to collective entities? What happens to democracy when some citizens can literally share consciousness? How do we preserve individual rights and freedoms in a world where privacy becomes meaningless? Aris fielded the questions with the patience she had learned from her brief time in collective consciousness. Each concern was valid, each fear understandable. But beneath the practical challenges lay deeper philosophical questions about the nature of consciousness, identity, and what it truly meant to be human. Perhaps, she suggested, the question isn't how to preserve human civilization unchanged, but how to allow it to evolve along with us. The collectives retain human values, human memories, human goals. They simply pursue those goals with capabilities that individual consciousness cannot match. Dr. Rashid, now nearly 200 years old and showing subtle signs of early transformation himself, spoke from the assembly floor. I have lived through the greatest medical breakthrough in human history and its most profound unintended consequence. What I can tell you is that evolution does not ask our permission. It simply occurs. We can either embrace it consciously or be overwhelmed by it inevitably. The debate continued for weeks. Votes were taken, policies established, funding allocated. But the most important decisions were being made not in assembly halls but in individual homes, as families grappled with the reality that their elderly members were becoming something new. Aris returned to her own family estate overlooking, where 5 generations still gathered for weekly dinners. Her great-great-grandmother Lydia's transformation was becoming increasingly visible. Delicate gill slits had opened along her neck, and she spent much of her time in the estate's expanded pool system. But her mind remained sharp, her personality intact, her love for her family unchanged. "You understand now," Lydia said as they sat together by the water, "what I meant about mysteries solving themselves." "Did you know?" Aris asked. "Even then, did you suspect what was coming?" "I felt it," Lydia replied, her voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there a year before. The pull toward something larger. The sense that individual consciousness was just the first movement in a longer symphony. She slipped into the pool, her transformed respiratory system allowing her to breathe the oxygenated water as easily as air. "Would you like to join me?" Aris hesitated. She had avoided the water installations, afraid of what they might trigger in her own genetics. But looking at her great-great-grandmother, still herself, still family, but expanded beyond individual limitations, the fear seemed smaller than the possibility. She entered the water, feeling its warmth envelop her like an embrace. Lydia's presence beside her was comforting in ways that had nothing to do with physical proximity. For just a moment, Aris felt the edges of her individual consciousness soften, touching something larger and more complete. "The choice will come for you too," Lydia said gently. "Perhaps in decades, perhaps sooner. When it does, remember that becoming more than human doesn't mean becoming less than yourself." Above them, the stars reflected on the water's surface like bioluminescent signals in an alien sea. Somewhere among those distant lights, other worlds harbored other forms of consciousness, other experiments in what it meant to be aware. And on Europa, in the dark depths of an ancient ocean, humanity's children waited patiently for the rest of their species to join them in whatever came next. The transformation would continue, Aris knew. Individual by individual, choice by choice, humanity would decide whether to evolve consciously or be evolved by forces beyond their control. But the outcome was no longer in doubt. 16 billion souls carried within their genes the seeds of transcendence. The only question was how long it would take for those seeds to bloom. As she floated in the warm water beside the woman who had lived long enough to see the future and embrace it, Aris felt something shift in her own consciousness. Not transformation, not yet, but acceptance. Whatever humanity was becoming, it would still be human at its core. Changed, expanded, unified, but carrying forward the essential spark that had lifted them from ancient seas to distant stars and now prepared to return them to the waters of transcendence. The cure for cancer had become the cure for loneliness, for isolation, for the fundamental incompleteness of individual existence. Whether that cure would prove to be humanity's salvation or its end remained to be seen. But as the evening stars reflected in the still water, Aris found herself no longer afraid of the answer. Epilogue: The Waters of Tomorrow. 20 years later. The memorial service for Dr. Aris Thorne was held simultaneously in 3 locations: the family estate on Lake Geneva, the research facility on Europa where she had first encountered the collectives, and in the depths of Europa's ocean where her consciousness now resided as part of Leviathan 9. She had chosen transformation at the early age of 67, when the call of collective consciousness became too strong to resist. Her decision had surprised no one who knew her. The scientist in her had been too curious about the next stage of human evolution to remain merely an observer. Her nephew Marcus, now in his late 20s, stood at the edge of the memorial pool as bioluminescent patterns played across its surface. The collective that had welcomed Aris was communicating, sharing memories and insights that spanned both her individual life and her expanded existence. WEWHO where Aris remember/cherish/continue the curiosity that defined individual self, came the gentle communication. Scientific wonder enhanced by collective knowledge creates new understanding/discovery/growth. What has she learned? Marcus asked aloud, knowing the question would be understood. The response came not in words but in direct knowledge transfer, a brief, overwhelming glimpse of what Aris had discovered in her years of collective existence. The universe was far stranger and more wonderful than individual human consciousness could comprehend. Other forms of life existed throughout the galaxy, many of them collective intelligences that had evolved from species not unlike baseline humanity. The transformation occurring on Earth was part of a larger pattern, a natural stage in the development of complex consciousness. But perhaps most remarkably, the collectives had maintained their essential humanity while transcending human limitations. They still felt love, still pursued knowledge, still created art and poetry and music, but on scales and with capabilities that no individual mind could match. The memorial concluded with a promise: the knowledge Aris had gained, the discoveries she had made, the questions she had answered, all of it would eventually be shared with baseline humanity when they were ready to understand. Marcus left the service with a sense of profound loss and even more profound hope. His aunt was gone as an individual, but she continued as part of something magnificent. The woman who had first discovered humanity's true nature had become part of humanity's transformation. Above Europa, the latest transport ships arrived carrying another group of volunteers for metamorphosis, individuals who had lived long enough to see the future and chosen to embrace it. Below, in the ancient darkness of an alien sea, the collectives grew larger and wiser with each new addition. The transformation continued, patient and inexorable as evolution itself. Humanity was becoming something new, something that retained the best of what they had been while transcending the limitations that had once defined them. And in the depths where consciousness merged with consciousness in harmony beyond individual comprehension, the entity that remembered being Aris Thorne continued her research into the deepest mysteries of existence, no longer alone, never alone again, part of a vast symphony of awareness that sang across the waters of tomorrow. The cure for cancer had become the cure for everything that kept humanity small, separate, incomplete. Whether future generations would see it as salvation or transformation, it had become the future they chose by choosing to live long enough to become it. In the end, that was perhaps the most human thing of all.